She had not seen a single sunrise in 18 years. Not her father's face, not the color of her own hands, nothing. And the morning everything changed, and it wasn't a world-renowned surgeon who walked through her door. It was a rookie nurse named Emily Harris, 26 years old, 3 months on the job, who noticed something that 73 specialists had completely missed. What happened next shook an entire hospital to its foundation. If this story moves you, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning started the way it always did, quiet, sterile, predictable. Emily Harris walked through the double doors of Walter Ridge Medical Center at exactly 6:47 a.m. Her sneakers still slightly damp from the parking lot puddles, her badge clipped slightly crooked at her collar. She adjusted it out of habit, not vanity. She had learned quickly that in a hospital like Walter Ridge, appearances mattered to the people above her, even when nothing else about her seemed to. 3 months. That's all she had been here. 3 months of learning, which attendings took their coffee black, which charged nurses kept the real supply keys, and which hallways to avoid after 9 p.m. if you didn't want to be invisible. She was already invisible. The other nurses knew it. The residents knew it. The orderlies, bless them, at least said good morning. Emily didn't mind. She hadn't come to Walter Ridge to be seen. She had come to do her job. She pulled her assignment sheet from the boardroom 412 4th floor long-term care wing, and her eyes moved down the patient profile she'd been handed the night before during handoff. Stone Ava, age 24. Bilateral congenital blindness confirmed. Stable. Monitoring only. Monitoring only. That phrase sat in Emily's chest like a stone she couldn't name yet. She had heard about Ava Stone before she ever set foot in that room. Everyone at Walter Ridge had. Ava's father, General Daniel Stone, was not a man who made quiet entrances. He was 61 years old, decorated rigid, the kind of man whose very posture communicated that the world had better cooperate or explain itself immediately. He had served 3 combat tours. He had shaken hands with 3 presidents. And for the past 18 years, he had spent what most people estimated to be upward of $2 million, some whispered much more, searching for any physician, any specialist, any human being on this earth who could give his daughter her vision back. 73 of them had tried. 73 had walked away with the same conclusion. She will never see. The damage is congenital, irreversible. I am sorry, General. He had heard those words so many times that Emily imagined they no longer even registered as language. Just sound, just air. Ava had been brought to Walter Ridge 6 weeks ago for what the general called one final evaluation, though hospital staff had learned very quickly not to use the word final around him unless they were prepared to defend it. The chief of neurology, Dr. Raymond Holt, had taken personal charge of Ava's case. Dr. Holt was 54, Harvard-trained, the kind of physician whose confidence occupied the room before he did. He had reviewed her records. He had run his own tests. He had delivered his verdict 3 weeks in. The diagnosis stands. There is nothing more to be done medically. I recommend transitional care and quality of life support. The general had not spoken for 45 seconds after hearing those words. Staff who were present that day still talked about it, and then he had simply said, "Then we stay until I am satisfied." So they stayed, and Ava stayed, and every morning the monitoring-only note sat at the top of her chart. Emily knocked twice before entering room 412. That was the first thing she always did. Knock, even when patients couldn't see her coming, especially when they couldn't see her coming. It was a small thing she knew, but Emily had always believed that small things were where real respect lived. "Good morning," she said, stepping inside. "My name is Emily. I'm your nurse this morning. I'll be checking your vitals and making sure you're comfortable. Is that okay?" There was a pause, then a voice, calm, measured, and somehow older than 24 years should sound, came from the bed. "You knocked." "I did. Most of them don't." Emily set her tray down carefully. "Well, I figure you hear everything in this room. Last thing you need is someone sneaking up on you." Another pause, shorter this time. "Emily," the voice said, as if filing the name away somewhere permanent. "Okay." That was it. That was the beginning. Ava Stone was not what Emily had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected, a girl broken by 18 years of blindness maybe. Withdrawn. Hollow. The kind of quiet that comes from a person who has stopped wanting things. But Ava wasn't hollow. She was contained, like a fire burning at exactly the temperature it chose. Alert, present. Her hands rested on the blanket with a kind of deliberate calm, and she tracked Emily's movements through sound alone with a precision that was almost unnerving. "You're new here," Ava said. Not a question. 3 months, Emily confirmed, wrapping the blood pressure cuff. "Still figuring out where they keep the extra pulse oximeters. Third supply cabinet, left of the nurse's station. Second shelf." Emily blinked. "How do you know that?" "I hear the nurses talking about it every time they can't find one." A pause. "I hear a lot of things people don't think I hear." Emily noted the blood pressure reading completely normal and moved through the rest of her checklist with steady hands. But her mind was already somewhere else. She was watching Ava's eyes. It was subtle. It was so subtle that Emily almost talked herself out of it twice before she finished the morning vitals. She had moved to the window to adjust the blind standard procedure, no particular reason, and a narrow bar of early morning light fell across the room, crossing directly over Ava's face. And Ava blinked. Not a slow, reflexive blink, a sharp one, like a response. Emily's hand stilled on the blinds. She shifted the angle slightly, drawing the light away. Ava's expression relaxed by the smallest fraction. Emily shifted it back. The same micro flinch, the same tightening at the corner of the eye. She stood very still. That's a reaction, she thought. That is a genuine response to light stimulus. She did not say it out loud. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. She barely trusted the thought inside her own head. But she noted it. She noted everything. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said, her voice deliberately casual as she logged the final vitals. "People usually ask before they ask," Ava said. "But go ahead. Does light ever bother you, not visually? I mean, does it ever feel different to you? A bright room versus a darker one?" Silence, it was a very particular kind of silence, the kind that comes before someone decides how honest they want to be. "Why happened?" Ava asked. "You're just curious, medical curiosity. You can ignore the question." Another pause. Then quietly, like she was confessing something she'd kept small on purpose. "Sometimes when it's very bright, I get a headache, right behind my eyes." A beat. "My father's doctors said it's neurological, common in my condition." "When did that start?" "I don't remember not having it." Emily wrote nothing down. She simply smiled and said, "Thank you. Rest well, Ava." She walked out of room 412 with her tray, her clipboard, and a thought she couldn't shake loose if she tried. She should have let it go. Every logical part of her brain told her to let it go. She was 3 months out of nursing school. She had reviewed exactly 0 ophthalmological research outside of standard coursework. She didn't know Ava's full medical history. She'd seen one summary sheet and a handoff briefing. She had no standing, no credentials, and absolutely no business second-guessing a diagnosis that had been confirmed and reconfirmed by 73 specialists over 18 years. She should have let it go. She went to the break room, poured a coffee she didn't drink, and opened Ava's chart on the workstation in the corner, just to look. The file was extensive. That was the first thing that struck her, the sheer physical weight of 18 years of medical documentation compressed into a digital record. Specialist reports from 4 countries, imaging studies, genetic panels, treatment trials, conference notes, appeals, second opinions on second opinions. Emily read for 40 minutes without moving. She wasn't looking for anything specific. She was just reading the way she always read, slowly, without assuming she already knew the ending. And then she found something. Not a smoking gun, not a revelation. Just to note a single line buried in a follow-up report from a pediatric ophthalmologist who had seen Ava at age 7. The doctor had since retired. The note read, "Patient demonstrates mild photosensitivity. Source unclear. Recommend follow-up if persistent." No follow-up had ever been documented. Emily sat back. Photosensitivity. In a patient diagnosed with bilateral congenital blindness, a condition where the visual system was considered entirely non-functional, photosensitivity made no clinical sense. Unless the visual system wasn't entirely non-functional. Unless something else entirely was going on. She didn't sleep that night. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She told herself she was a new nurse with 3 months of experience playing armchair diagnostician with one of the most documented medical cases in the hospital's recent history. She told herself that Dr. Raymond Holt had forgotten more about neurology than she would ever learn, and that the idea of walking up to him or anyone with this half-formed, unsubstantiated, barely a theory thought was professionally suicidal. She researched anyway. She sat at her kitchen table until 2 a.m. with 3 medical databases open and a legal pad filling up with handwritten notes. She found a 2014 case study from a clinic in the Netherlands. A patient blind from birth by all prior diagnoses had been found to have bilateral persistent fetal vasculature, a rare developmental condition where a fibrous membrane present during fetal eye development had failed to fully reabsorb. The membranes had obscured the visual pathway without destroying it. The underlying structures had been completely intact. The patient had undergone surgery. The patient had regained functional vision. Emily stared at the page for a long time. Then she pulled Ava's earliest imaging reports and read them again. And again. The original scans were from when Ava was 4 days old. The technology then 2001 was not what it was today. The resolution was limited. The interpretation had been made by neonatologists, not ophthalmological specialists, in the first critical hours after birth. They may have seen exactly what they expected to see. That thought landed like a weight she couldn't lift off her chest. What if no one ever looked for what they didn't expect? She went back to room 412 the next morning, and the morning after that. She was assigned to Ava's rotation for the week, which she hadn't asked for, but which felt in some part of her that she didn't fully examine like something she needed. She brought a small pen light on the 3rd day. "Ava," she said quietly, "I want to try something. It might feel a little strange. Is that all right?" "You're going to shine a light in my eyes," Ava said. Emily paused. "How did you?" "You've been watching my eyes every morning since the first day." A small, dry, almost smile. "I told you, I hear things, and I feel things. You've been watching how I react to light." The air in the room shifted. "Does that bother you?" Emily asked carefully. "No." A pause. "It's the first time anyone's watched me like they thought there was something to find." Emily's throat tightened. She kept her voice even. "I want to document your photosensitivity response formally. That's all, just a notation in your chart." "Okay. And I want to ask Dr. Holt about ordering updated imaging." The silence this time was different. "He won't," Ava said. Flat, certain, not bitter, just factual the way a person speaks about weather. "Maybe not," Emily said. "But I'd like to try." Ava turned her face toward Emily's voice with that uncanny directional precision she had. "Why?" she asked. And underneath the word was something else, something careful and fragile, something that had been hurt by hope before and knew exactly how much it cost. "Why does it matter to you? You don't know me." Emily set down the pen light. "Because you react to light," she said simply. "And that shouldn't be possible if the diagnosis is right. And if the diagnosis isn't right," she stopped. "You deserve to know." Ava didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "Okay, Emily. Just that. Okay, doctor." Holt's office was on the 3rd-floor corner suite, the kind of space that communicated without subtlety that the person inside it had not climbed this far to be questioned by people who hadn't. Emily knocked. "Come in." She stepped inside with her notepad, her printed research, and the pen light in her breast pocket, and she laid out what she had found in the most organized, composed 3 minutes of her professional life. She cited the chart note from 2008. She cited the Dutch case study. She described Ava's photosensitivity response in specific clinical terms. She suggested that updated high-resolution imaging might reveal structural details the original neonatal scans had missed. Dr. Holt listened. He listened with his hands folded on his desk and his expression absolutely unchanging, the way a very experienced person listens when they have already decided the answer and are simply waiting for the other person to finish. When she was done, there was a pause. "Nurse." He glanced at her badge. "Harris." "Yes, sir." "How long have you been working here?" 3 months. 3 months. He repeated it the way you might repeat a number that's come out wrong in a calculation. "And in 3 months, you've reviewed this patient's complete medical file, cross-referenced it with international case studies, and arrived at a differential diagnosis that contradicts the findings of over 70 board-certified specialists. "I'm not diagnosing," Emily said carefully. "I'm suggesting that the photosensitivity response warrants a second look at the imaging. The imaging has been reviewed multiple times. With the technology available at the time, yes, but updated high-resolution OCT or Miss Harris." His voice dropped one register. "Not loud, much worse than loud. I appreciate enthusiasm in new staff. I do not appreciate a 3-month nurse walking into my office and suggesting that I have mismanaged one of the highest profile cases in this hospital's recent history." He paused. "Do you understand the implications of what you are implying?" "I'm not implying anything about your management. You are implying that we missed something, that this family has spent 18 years and approximately $2 million being told the wrong thing." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you have any idea what that accusation would do to this department, to this hospital, to the general?" Emily's hands were steady. Her voice was steady. She was not steady. "I understand the stakes," she said. "That's why I came to you first." The pause stretched out like a wire pulled too tight. "Go back to your patients, Nurse Harris," he said finally, "and do not bring this to me again." She walked out of his office, turned left down the corridor, and stood at the window at the end of the hall for exactly 90 seconds. Then she went back to her patients. She did her job for the rest of the shift with clean hands and a quiet face. But inside her chest, something had shifted into a position it couldn't shift back from. Because Dr. Holt had said something in that careful, controlled dismissal that had told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't said "you're wrong." He had said, "Do you know what this would cost us?" Those were not the same sentence. And Emily Harris, 3 months into her career, invisible and inexperienced, and entirely too stubborn for her own good, had heard the difference. She was right about something. She didn't know yet what she was going to do about it. But she knew she wasn't done. Not even close. She didn't sleep again that night. Not because she was obsessing, though she was, but because every time she closed her eyes, she heard Dr. Holt's voice recycling through her head on a loop she couldn't switch off. "Do you know what this would cost us? Not you're wrong. Not the science doesn't support it. Just what it would cost." She lay in the dark of her apartment and stared at the ceiling and thought about a 24-year-old woman who had never seen the sun and a doctor who had responded to the possibility of her healing by calculating the liability. She got up at 4 a.m. and made coffee and opened her laptop again. She wasn't looking for permission. She had stopped waiting for that the moment she walked out of Holt's office. She was looking for certainty, the kind that lived below. Argument below, politics below the noise of institutional self-protection. She needed to know as absolutely as she could know anything, whether what she suspected was medically possible. Not just theoretically, not just in one Dutch case study from 2014. She searched for 3 hours. By 7 a.m., she had found 11 documented cases across 4 countries, all different presentations, all carrying some variant of the same underlying truth. Visual systems declared non-functional, later discovered to be intact, obscured by structural anomalies. That imaging technology from the late 90s and early 2000s had been too limited to detect clearly. 11 cases, 11 people who had been told never, and who had, with the right eyes looking at the right data, been told something different. She printed everything, organized it into a folder, labeled it with Ava's case number. Then she drove to work and did her job. She said nothing. For 2 full days, she said absolutely nothing. She took Ava's vitals every morning. She adjusted the blinds. She documented the photosensitivity response in the nursing notes quietly, methodically, in clinical language that was precise enough to stand alone if anyone looked. She asked Ava small questions that Ava answered with her characteristic economy of words, neither warming nor pulling back, just present in that particular contained way of hers. On the second day, she asked, "Does it ever feel different behind your eyes when you're tired versus rested?" Ava was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes when I wake up from deep sleep, just for a second, there's something, like pressure that lifts, and then it comes back." Emily wrote it down. "I told one of the doctors that once," Ava said, 3 years ago. "He said it was REM-related neural activity, normal for my condition." "What did you think?" A pause. "I thought he wasn't really listening to me. I thought he heard what he already knew and stopped there. She turned her face toward Emily's voice. But I'm not a doctor, so you don't have to be a doctor to know your own body, Emily said. Ava didn't respond to that, but her jaw shifted a small, almost involuntary tightening that Emily had learned to read as something landing somewhere true. That evening, Emily requested a meeting with the head of nursing, Patricia Okafor. Patricia was 57, formidable in the way that women become formidable when they have spent 3 decades being underestimated by people who later needed things from them. She had managed this floor through 4 chief physician changes, 2 hospital mergers, and a pandemic. She did not rattle. Emily laid out everything, the chart note, the research, the photosensitivity documentation. The pressure sensation Ava had described. She was clear she was measured, and she did not oversell. Patricia listened without interrupting, which Emily had learned meant she was taking it seriously. When Emily finished, Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You all already went to Holt 2 days ago, and he told me to go back to my patients." Patricia's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "Emily," she set down her pen, "I'm going to tell you something that isn't in any manual. What you're describing, if you're right, is not a small correction. It's not we missed a side effect or we should adjust the medication. It's 18 years of confirmed diagnosis being overturned. Do you understand what that means for every physician who ever signed their name to that file? I understand it means they were wrong. It means more than that. It means malpractice conversations. It means the general who is not a gentleman when he feels his family has been failed will have grounds to pursue every specialist who ever told him his daughter was beyond help." She paused. "Holt knows that. Every senior staff member in this building knows that. That's not medicine anymore. That's survival." "And Ava," Emily said quietly, "what does it mean for her?" Patricia looked at her for a long moment. "It means everything," she said, "and that's exactly why this is dangerous." She picked her pen back up. "I'm not telling you to drop it. I'm telling you to understand what you're walking into. Because if you push this, if you go over Holt's head, or around him, or directly to the family, you will not be protected. Not by this department. Not by this hospital. You understand me?" "Yes," Emily said. "You could lose this job." "I know." Patricia studied her. 3 months, and you're already willing to walk off a cliff for a patient you have known less than a week." Emily didn't answer that because she didn't know exactly what to say. She only knew that it wasn't a choice that felt like a choice. It felt like breathing. Like the absence of doing it would have been the thing that required effort. Patricia looked down at the folder on her desk. She didn't open it. She didn't hand it back. She just left it sitting there between them. "I didn't have this conversation with you," she said finally. "And I certainly didn't tell you that General Stone takes a walk in the East Corridor at 7 a.m. every morning because he can't sleep, and the 4th floor nurses' lounge has a coffee machine that actually works." Emily looked at her. Patricia picked up her pen and returned to her paperwork. Emily picked up her folder and left. She stood in the hallway outside the nursing office for 10 seconds, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. And then she made a decision that she knew even in the moment of making it, she could not unmake. She set her alarm for 6:45 a.m. The next morning was gray and quiet when Emily walked into the East Corridor with her folder under her arm and her heart in her throat. She had practiced what she was going to say. She had practiced it in the mirror at 5:30 a.m. Like she was preparing for something that required that kind of preparation because it did. General Daniel Stone was exactly where Patricia had said he'd be. He was taller than she'd expected, not dramatically, but in the way that some people occupy more vertical space than their measurements technically account for. He had the bearing of a man who had spent decades holding himself at attention even when he was technically at ease. His hair was silver. His face was the kind of face that had been weathered not by age alone, but by a particular kind of sustained grief, the grief that doesn't break you because you won't let it, so instead it just carves you slowly over years. He was holding a paper cup of coffee and looking at nothing. Emily walked toward him before she could think herself out of it. "General Stone." He turned, his eyes moved to her badge, back to her face. "Nurse. My name is Emily Harris. I've been assigned to Ava's care this week." She paused. "I need to speak with you about something. I want to be direct with you because I think you're someone who prefers that." His expression didn't change, but he didn't walk away, which was all she needed. Then be direct. I believe there's a possibility, not a certainty, a possibility that Ava's diagnosis may be incomplete. I think there is a structural anomaly that was missed in the original imaging, and I think updated high-resolution scans could either confirm or rule that out. She stopped. I brought documentation, if you'd be willing to look at it. The silence that followed was the longest 12 seconds of Emily's career. Then he said, "How old are you?" 26. "How long have you been a nurse?" 3 months. Something crossed his face, not contempt exactly, more like a kind of exhausted calculation. "Do you know how many people have walked up to me over 18 years and told me they had found something, that they had a theory that this time was different?" No, sir." 41, he said. "I kept count." He looked at the folder in her hands. 41 people who had read something or heard something or thought something, and every single one of them was wrong. Emily met his eyes. She did not look away. "I know, and I might be wrong too. But I've been in that room with your daughter every morning for a week, and I've watched her react to light with a consistency that does not match her documented condition. And I found a chart note from 2008 that documented photosensitivity with no follow-up. And I found 11 cases, 11 of similar presentations, where the underlying visual structure was intact and the condition was reversible." She held out the folder. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look." He stared at the folder. He didn't take it. "You went to Holt," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And he turned you away?" "Yes." "So you came to me directly." He studied her the way she imagined he had once studied terrain that could either be crossed safely or couldn't be crossed at all. That either makes you very brave or very reckless. "I've been told it might be both," Emily said, and then something shifted in his face. Not warmth exactly, not hope exactly, but a crack. The smallest, most carefully guarded crack in 18 years of controlled, weaponized composure. He took the folder. He didn't open it there. He tucked it under his arm and looked at her for one more moment. "If you're wrong," he said quietly, "you know what happens to you here, Sama." "Yes." "And you're still standing in this hallway?" "Yes, sir." He looked at her the way she imagined he had once looked at soldiers who had done something unreasonable and correct at the same time. "I'll read it," he said. He walked away. Emily exhaled for the first time in what felt like several minutes. She thought, okay. She thought it started now and there is no going back. She thought briefly and uselessly about the job security she may have just signed away. And then she went to take Ava's morning vitals because her shift started in 4 minutes and she was not the kind of person who let anything bleed into the work. She found out what happened next, not from the general, not from anyone in administration, but from a third-year resident named Marco, who had an unfortunate habit of talking too loudly near open doorways. "Holt's losing his mind," Marco told the nurse at the station, his voice barely below conversational volume. "The general apparently walked into his office an hour ago and asked for updated ophthalmological imaging on Ava Stone, and not asked, demanded, with a folder full of research that he didn't put together himself." A pause. "Holt is furious. Nobody knows where the research came from." Emily kept walking. She was at Ava's door when she heard footsteps behind her, sharp, fast, purposeful, and she turned to find Dr. Holt coming down the corridor with his face set in an expression that could have stripped paint. He stopped 3 feet from her. "My office," he said. "Now." Emily looked at Ava's closed door. "I have a patient. Martinez can cover. My office. Now, Nurse Harris." She followed him. He didn't speak until the door was closed, and then he turned on her with the kind of fury that has been compressed through professionalism until it becomes almost surgical. "You went to the family," he said. "I went to the patient's guardian after my clinical concerns were dismissed through proper channels, yes. I told you to drop it. You told me it would cost the department. You didn't tell me I was wrong." She kept her voice even. She had prepared for this too. "Dr. Holt, with respect, I documented a consistent photosensitivity response over 5 consecutive days. I found an unresolved notation in the chart. I identified 11 comparable cases in peer-reviewed literature. All of that is in the nursing record. If updated imaging comes back clear, I will accept the result fully and without complaint. But if there's even a 5% chance that you don't understand what you've done, his voice dropped, and underneath the fury was something else, something that sounded, if she was reading it right, disturbingly close to fear. The general isn't a man who asks twice. If he requests that imaging, this department will be scrutinized in ways you cannot imagine. Every decision I have made on this case for the past 6 weeks will be examined. Every prior specialist will be contacted. And if anything is found, he stopped. Then Ava gets to see, Emily said. The words landed between them like something irreversible. Holt stared at her. Get back to your patients, he said. Emily left. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard his office door open behind her. Harris. She turned. He stood in the doorway and something had changed in his face, something minute and almost invisible that a person would have to be very specifically paying attention to notice. The photosensitivity response, he said. You documented it over 5 days. Every morning, 7 a.m. consistent response to natural light variation. Chart entry time-stamped. A pause so long she almost thought he'd changed his mind about whatever he was about to say. I'll order the imaging, he said. Standard protocol review. And Harris. His jaw tightened. If you're wrong, this conversation happened. Understood. And if you're right, he stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. Maybe he couldn't. He went back inside and closed the door. Emily stood in the corridor. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, or not only from fear. From something that didn't have a clean name yet, something that lived right at the edge of disbelief and conviction where a person stands when they have been running towards something and suddenly realize the ground beneath them might actually hold. She pressed her back against the wall for exactly 5 seconds. Then she straightened up, took a breath, and walked back to Ava's room. Ava heard her before the door was fully open. You were gone longer than usual, she said. I was. Emily set her tray down and began the morning routine with steady hands. How are you feeling? The same, am I? A beat. Something's different with you. Emily glanced at her. What do you mean, Saeed? Your footsteps are different. You walked in faster. And your breathing is... Ava tilted her head slightly. You're scared, but not the kind of scared that makes you want to leave. The kind that makes you want to stay. Emily paused with the cuff half attached. She looked at Ava, this young woman who had built an entire interior world out of sound and pressure and the 1,000 details that sighted people never learned to hear, and she felt something tighten in her chest that she had no clinical word for. They're going to order new imaging, Emily said. Ava went very still. On you, Emily added. New scans, more detailed than what was done before. The silence stretched out for a full 10 seconds. Who ordered it? Ava asked. Dr. Holt. Did my father do something? He asked, yes. Ava was quiet. Her hands on the blanket had stopped moving. That small, perpetual adjustment, she made the tactile reading of her environment, and they were just still. Like the rest of her had needed to stop everything in order to process this single fact. Emily, she said finally. Her voice was steady in the way that things are steady when a person is holding them with both hands. What do you think they'll find? Emily looked at her for a long moment. I think, she said carefully, that you have been heard finally. And whatever they find, you deserve to know the truth about your own body. Ava nodded once, and then so quietly that Emily almost missed it. I'm scared. I know. I've been not hoping for a long time, Ava said. It was easier. Not hoping. She paused. Hope is heavier, Emily said. Ava turned toward her voice. Yeah, she said. Exactly that. Emily finished the vitals. She logged everything. She did all the small mechanical things that nurses do when the large, uncontrollable things are happening just outside the reach of their hands. And when she left room 412 that morning, she carried with her the knowledge that somewhere down the corridor, the imaging order had been filed, that the machinery of the hospital was now reluctantly and under considerable pressure pointing itself toward a question it had never seriously asked, and that a young woman in a bed down the hall was lying in the dark with something in her chest she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Terrifying, unbearable, necessary hope. The imaging was scheduled for Thursday. Emily found out on a Tuesday through the kind of sideways hospital communication that travels faster than any official memo, a technician mentioning it to a resident mentioning it to a charge nurse glancing at Emily in the corridor with an expression that said, "Whatever you did, it worked, and also you might want to watch your back." 2 days, 48 hours between now and the moment a machine would either confirm 18 years of medical certainty or quietly, irrevocably begin to dismantle it. Emily told herself she was not counting. She was absolutely counting. The floor felt different in those 2 days. Or maybe she was the one who felt different and she was projecting it onto everything around her. The morning rounds felt charged. The silences in the nurse's station felt weighted. Dr. Holt passed her twice in the corridor without speaking, which was not unusual except that both times he looked at her the way a person looks at a door they've already walked through and can't quite believe they opened. Senior staff were talking. She knew that. She didn't know exactly what they were saying, but she could read the temperature of a room well enough to know that the conversation had moved from a rookie nurse got above herself to something more unsettled, more watchful. Like people who had been standing on ground they assumed was solid had started to feel it shift just slightly under their feet and weren't sure yet if it meant anything. On Wednesday afternoon, a woman named Dr. Susan Che stopped Emily in the hallway outside the fourth-floor supply room. Doctor. Che was a senior ophthalmology fellow, 30s quiet, the kind of precise intelligence that didn't announce itself, and she was the last person Emily expected to seek her out. "You're Harris," she said. "Yes." "I read your nursing notes." She said it without preamble, without judgment in either direction, simply as a fact being placed on a table between them. "The photosensitivity documentation." Emily waited. "I've been at Walter Ridge for 2 years, Dr. Che said. I came in after the stone case had already been closed and filed. I never reviewed the primary imaging." She paused and something in her expression shifted, careful, almost reluctant. "The 2001 neonatal scans used a resolution standard that we've since updated significantly. The margin for missed structural detail in anterior segment pathology, particularly developmental membrane retention, was not negligible." Emily's heart was doing something loud and inconvenient in her chest. She kept her face still. "You think I'm right?" "I think the question is valid," Dr. Che said precisely, "which is not the same thing." She looked at Emily for a moment. "I'm going to be in the imaging suite Thursday morning. Not officially. I asked to observe." She paused again. "I wanted you to know that." Then she walked away. Emily stood in the hallway for a moment and thought, "I am not alone in this." The thought landed with more force than she expected. She had been operating for the past week on the assumption that she was building this case entirely on her own, that every step forward was a step into isolation. The idea that someone else had looked at what she'd found and arrived carefully and independently at the same edge of possibility that changed the weight of what Thursday meant. She went back to Ava. "You're earlier than usual," Ava said when the door opened. "I wanted to talk before the shift gets busy." Emily pulled the chair close to the bed and sat, which she didn't usually do, and Ava tracked the sound of it with her head. "That's different," Ava said. "You're sitting." "I am." A pause. "How are you actually doing, not medically?" "Actually." Ava was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about what happens if it's nothing," she said. "If they do the scan and it's exactly what they've always said, and I have to reset, back to just knowing." She turned her face toward Emily. "I've gotten very good at just knowing, at not wanting the other thing." "I know. And now I want it," Ava said. Her voice stayed steady, but the words cost something. Emily could hear the weight of them. "I didn't want to want it. You made me want it." The honesty of it hit Emily like a palm to the sternum. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be." Ava's jaw tightened. "I think I needed someone to make me want it again. She stopped. "If it's nothing, Emily, if it comes back the same, then we know," Emily said. "And knowing is not nothing. Even the hard answer is still an answer." Eva nodded slowly. She reached out, then, not searching, not uncertain, but with the same directional precision she applied to everything, and her hand found Emily's arm and rested there for just a moment, not asking for comfort exactly, more like confirming a coordinate, making sure the person was real and present and intended to stay. "Okay," Ava said. "Okay," Emily said back. They sat like that for a minute in the quiet of the room, and then Emily stood, and they both returned to the ordinary structure of the morning. Because sometimes that's what you do with enormous things. You put them carefully aside and take someone's blood pressure and exist in the practical world for just a little longer, because the practical world is what keeps you from coming apart before the important moment arrives. Thursday came. The imaging suite was one floor below. Emily had no official reason to be anywhere near it. She was on her regular rotation fourth floor, her patients requiring her attention and her attention belonging to them absolutely. She was professional. She was present. She did her job. She also checked her watch 14 times between 7 and 9 a.m. The procedure itself took approximately 90 minutes standard for a comprehensive high-resolution OCT scan combined with anterior segment imaging, plus the additional sequences Dr. Holt had apparently ordered after someone Emily suspected Dr. Che had made a quiet recommendation about supplemental views. She knew this because Marco, the resident, still had no volume control, and the nurse's station had good acoustics. At 10:23 a.m., Dr. Holt emerged from the imaging suite. Emily was at the far end of the corridor, not watching technically because she was checking a supply cart. She was watching. Holt's face told her nothing. That was both the best and worst possible outcome of reading his expression. He had the kind of face that under controlled circumstances revealed only what he chose. He walked straight to the elevators without stopping, which could have meant anything, and Emily stood at the supply cart with a box of sterile gloves in her hand and an entirely unreasonable heart rate. 20 minutes passed. 30. At 11:08 a.m., her phone buzzed with an internal message. From Dr. Che, "Can you come to the third floor conference room, now if possible?" Emily set down the gloves. She covered her remaining patients with Martinez and walked to the elevator with her face set and her hands loose at her sides and every nerve in her body running at a frequency she couldn't control. Dr. Che was in the conference room alone. She was standing at the table with a tablet in her hand and an expression that Emily could not immediately classify. It wasn't joy, wasn't vindication, wasn't the clean satisfaction of being proven right. It was something more complicated. Something that looked like a person standing at the edge of something too large to fully process. "Close the door," she said. Emily closed it. Dr. Che turned the tablet and showed her the imaging results. Emily looked at them for a long time. She wasn't a trained ophthalmologist. She couldn't read the full clinical picture the way Che could. But she had spent a week reading everything she could find about this specific presentation, and she could see clearly, unmistakably in the high-resolution anterior segment view, the bilateral membranous structures sitting over the lens, fine and fibrous, and entirely catastrophically overlooked. "Persistent fetal vasculature," Dr. Che said. Her voice was precise and controlled, but there was something underneath it. Bilateral, significantly more advanced on the right. The underlying structures, she paused. "Emily, the retinal architecture is intact, both sides. There is no congenital neural damage. The visual pathway is functionally whole." The room went completely silent. "She's not blind," Emily said. "She is blind," Che corrected carefully, "because of the membranes. But the blindness is structural and removable, not neurological and permanent." She looked at Emily directly. "You were right. 3 words, 6 syllables, 18 years. Emily sat down in the nearest chair because her legs had made that decision independently. Wow, she stopped, restarted. How was this missed? For 18 years, how did 73? The original scans were neonatal. Limited resolution. Significant artifact interpreted under time pressure in the first days of life by teams focused on survival indicators, not subtle developmental anomalies. Every specialist who came after inherited the original diagnosis and interpreted subsequent data through that lens. Che's jaw tightened. Confirmation bias compounded by 18 years and 73 signatures. No one looked for what wasn't already on the chart. Emily thought of Ava saying, "I thought he heard what he already knew," and stopped there. She pressed her hands flat on the table. "Does Holt know?" she asked. "He was in the room when we reviewed the results." Che paused. "He didn't speak for approximately 4 minutes, and then he asked me to wait here while he processed the implications." "And the general?" "Not yet informed. Holt is deciding how to proceed." Something cold moved through Emily. Che Ava needs to know. The family needs to know. This cannot be a conversation that gets managed by the department before it reaches her. I know that. If they decide to frame this in a way that protects the institution before it informs the patient, I know, Chase said more firmly, which is why I called you. Because I need someone else in this room who understands what the obligation is here. She looked at Emily steadily. Whatever Holt decides to do procedurally, Ava Stone is going to be told the truth about her own body today. Are we clear? Yes, Emily said, completely clear. The door opened. Dr. Holt walked in and stopped when he saw Emily. Something moved across his face, irritation maybe, or something more complicated than irritation, the way a man looks when the situation has outpaced his ability to control its shape. I didn't invite the nurse, he said to Che. I did, Che said simply. Holt looked at Emily for a moment. She met his eyes and held them without aggression and without apology, because she was done with apology and too far past aggression to reach it. She simply looked at him and waited. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily like a man setting down something he had been carrying for a long distance. The results are what they are, he said. The sentence had a particular texture to it, the flatness of a person who has rehearsed every possible defensive position and arrived finally at the only one left. Acceptance. Raw, uncomfortable, professional acceptance. The membranes are operable. We'll need to consult with a specialist in PFV. There's a surgeon at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Evan Marsh, who has performed 12 successful bilateral cases. I'll contact his office today. The family, Emily said. Holt looked at her. When are you telling the family? She said. He was quiet for a moment. This afternoon, I'll convene a meeting with the general and Ava, Emily said. She should be in that meeting, not managed separately after. She's 24 years old. She is the patient. She gets to be in the room when she finds out her life just changed. Holt's jaw tightened. She's right, Chase said quietly. Another silence. 3 seconds. 5. Fine, Holt said. 3 o'clock. Conference room 2. The patient, the general, you. He nodded at Che and myself. He glanced at Emily. You can wait outside. I'd like to be at Nurse Harris. His voice was not unkind. It was simply exhausted in a way that had moved past anger into something more human and much harder to argue with. You have done. He stopped, restarted. What you identified was significant. I am acknowledging that. He said it the way a man acknowledges something that costs him a great deal to acknowledge. But this conversation needs to happen in a controlled clinical setting, and that is not about protecting anyone. It is about doing right by the patient. A pause. I'll make sure she knows who brought this forward. Emily looked at him. She believed him, not entirely and not without reservations, but enough. "Kay," she said. She stood and she walked out of that conference room, and she went back upstairs to her floor, and she did her job for the next 3.5 hours with shaking hands and a mind that was entirely, completely somewhere else. At 2:47 p.m., she stood outside room 412. She knocked twice. "Emily," Ava said immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Emily stepped inside. She stood close to the bed and she looked at Ava, who was sitting up, her hands folded, her face carrying the careful, neutral expression of someone who has learned to wait without letting waiting destroy them. And she said, "There's a meeting in 13 minutes. Dr. Holt and your father are going to speak with you. I need you to go in there." She paused. "I need you to be ready." Ava's expression didn't move, but her hands did that small involuntary tightening again. "Ready for what?" she asked. Emily looked at her. At this woman who had built a whole life inside a darkness she had been told was permanent, who had learned to want less, to hope carefully, to navigate a world that had given her only one version of the truth and expected her to live entirely within it. "Ready for things to be different," Emily said. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Ava Stone lifted her chin and her expression shifted into something that was not hope and not fear, but the particular brand of courage that lives in the space between them. The courage of a person who has already survived the worst and has decided finally that they are willing to try for something better. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Emily said back, for the third time, like a word they had built something on. She helped Ava to her feet. She walked with her to the door. And then she stood at the threshold of room 412 and watched Ava move down the corridor toward conference room 2 and toward her father, who was already there, and toward a doctor who had been wrong for 18 years and was finally painfully ready to say so. Emily pressed her back against the doorframe. Her heart was running at a pace that no clinical measurement would have considered healthy. She waited, and down the hall a door opened and Ava Stone walked through it. She waited outside for 41 minutes. Emily knew the exact number because she had checked her watch at the start and couldn't stop checking it after that, each minute feeling like something physical pressing against her chest. She stood in the corridor outside conference room 2 with her arms folded and her back against the wall, and she told herself repeatedly and with diminishing success that whatever was happening behind that door was out of her hands now. She had done her part. She had carried it as far as she could carry it. The rest belonged to the people inside. She checked her watch again. 42 minutes. A passing orderly gave her a look that said she appeared to be either in trouble or in prayer. And at this point, the distinction felt academic. Then the door opened. General Stone came out first. He was moving differently than he had that morning in the corridor, not slower exactly, but heavier, like a man carrying something that had rearranged itself inside him and hadn't settled yet into a new weight distribution. His jaw was set. His eyes were dry, but the skin around them looked like it had recently considered not being dry and had made a forceful executive decision. He saw Emily and stopped. She straightened off the wall. He looked at her for a long moment, this 26-year-old nurse with her slightly crooked badge and her folder full of printed research and her complete absence of credentials for any of the things she had done over the past week. He looked at her the way a man looks at something that has overturned a category he thought was fixed. He said, "My daughter wants to speak with you." That was all. He stepped aside. Emily walked through the door. Ava was sitting at the conference table with Dr. Che on one side and an empty chair on the other. Dr. Holt was standing near the window with his back partially turned, which Emily read immediately and correctly as a man who needed a moment to exist somewhere inside his own head. Ava's hands were on the table completely still. Her face was the face of someone who has just been handed an enormous thing and hasn't moved yet because they're still determining whether their arms are strong enough to hold it. "Emily," she said, "I'm here." "They told me." Her voice was steady, almost unnaturally steady, the way still water looks right before something breaks its surface. "They told me about the membranes, about the surgery." "Okay," Emily said, and she sat down in the empty chair beside her. "They said it's operable." Ava said the word carefully like she was handling something fragile. "They said there's a surgeon, Dr. Marsh, Johns Hopkins, 12 successful cases." "That's right." "They said," she stopped, her shidal worked. "They said the underlying structures are intact, both eyes." She turned toward Emily's presence and her voice dropped into something that was barely above a whisper and was the most unguarded thing Emily had ever heard her say. "That means I've been able to see this whole time. Underneath it. This whole time." The sentence landed in the room like a stone in deep water. Emily didn't try to soften it or reframe it or wrap it in clinical language that would make it safer. She just sat with it. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do for another person is refuse to protect them from the truth of their own situation. "Yes," Emily said. Ava made a sound, not a cry, something smaller and more contained than a cry, a single exhale that carried 18 years in it. She pressed her lips together hard. Her hands on the table curled slightly inward. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." She said it the way a person says a word they need to hear in their own voice, because their own voice is currently the only thing solid enough to stand on. Dr. Holt turned from the window. His voice was quieter than Emily had ever heard it. "Ava, we are going to do everything in our power." "I know, Ava said, without anger, without bitterness, just clean, direct acknowledgement. "I know you are." She paused. "I'm not angry right now. I don't have room for it right now." She turned her face back toward Emily. "I need to ask you something. Anything. Did you know when you first walked into my room? Did you already know something was wrong?" Emily thought about the first morning, the pen light, the narrow bar of light across Ava's face, the sharp blink that shouldn't have been possible. "I suspected," she said. "I didn't know, I just couldn't stop looking." "Why?" Emily paused. It was a real question and it deserved a real answer. "Because you blinked," she said, "when the light changed. And a blink is a response. And a response means the system is working. And if the system is working, then the question isn't, can she see? It's why can't she see? And those are two completely different questions. Ava absorbed that, then she said very quietly, "You saw me when no one else was looking." The room was perfectly silent. Dr. Che looked at the table. Dr. Holt was still. Even the general who had come back through the door at some point without Emily noticing, stood at the far wall with his arms at his sides and his throat moving. "I was just doing my job," Emily said. "No," Ava said. "You were doing more than that, and I need you to let me say that." She reached out and found Emily's hand on the table, the same way she had in the room that morning, precise, deliberate, certain. "Thank you." Emily held her hand. She didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make the moment smaller by adding to it. Then Dr. Holt cleared his throat. "I've already placed a call to Dr. Marsh's office," he said. "Given the circumstances, I made it clear this is urgent. I expect we'll hear back within 24 hours. He paused. "And I want to say—" He stopped, started again. "I want to say for the record in this room that the observation which initiated this re-examination was made by Nurse Harris, and it was correct. And it should have been—" He stopped again. The pause was long enough that everyone in the room understood what he wasn't finishing. "It will be noted formally in the case file." Emily looked at him. He didn't meet her eyes, but he had said it, out loud in a room with witnesses in a way that could not be walked back. That mattered. She let it matter. The general spoke for the first time since re-entering. His voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with volume. "How long has she been like this? How long could she have—" He stopped. His jaw went tight. "How long?" The question fell on Holt, who absorbed it with the stillness of someone accepting something that is fully and completely theirs to accept. "The condition would have been present from birth," Holt said. "The membranes are developmental. With earlier detection technology—" "How long?" the general said again. "Quieter," which was worse. "From the beginning," Holt said, "potentially. With the right imaging, the right—" He stopped. "I'm sorry, General." 2 words, 7 letters, 18 years. Daniel Stone made no sound. He simply looked at a point above Holt's head, and his chest expanded on one long, controlled breath, and then he nodded once. Just once. Like a man who has survived things by the mechanism of deciding to survive them, and is applying that mechanism now to something it was never designed for. "Schedule the surgery," he said. "Yes, sir." "The best room, the best team, whatever Marsh needs." "I understand. And I want my daughter kept informed of every single step, every decision. Nothing through me first. Her first." His voice was iron and something underneath the iron that had no military name. "She has waited long enough to be the one who knows things." Holt nodded. "Agreed." The meeting ended. Emily walked out of that conference room and down the corridor to the women's restroom at the end of the hall, where she locked the door and stood at the sink for 3 minutes with the cold water running over her wrists and her eyes closed, and her entire body doing a kind of delayed, physiological accounting of the past 8 days that it hadn't been allowed to do while she was busy being professional and composed and quietly, stubbornly certain. She let herself shake for exactly those 3 minutes. Then she dried her hands, fixed her badge, looked at herself in the mirror. "Okay," she said. She went back to work. Dr. Marsh's office called back in 11 hours, not 24:11, which told Emily everything she needed to know about how Dr. Holt had framed the urgency of the situation, because Raymond Holt was, whatever his faults, a man who knew how to move an institution when he decided it needed to move. Dr. Evan Marsh arrived at Walter Ridge on a Saturday morning, 6 days after the imaging results. He was 53, compact, the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need a room to know it's there. He spent 2 hours reviewing Ava's case, an hour with the imaging team, and 30 minutes in a meeting with Holt, Che, and the general. Then he asked to speak with Ava alone. Emily was not in that meeting. She didn't need to be. She was at the nurse's station when Ava's call light came on at 4 p.m. She went to the room. Ava was sitting up in bed with her hands in her lap, and an expression Emily had not seen on her before opened in a way that was slightly terrifying to look at, because Ava Stone had spent 24 years learning to be closed as a form of protection, and whatever Marsh had said to her had unlocked something that clearly had no interest in going back inside. "He says he can do it," Ava said. "I know. He says the right side is more complex. It'll take longer. But he's done worse." She paused. He said if it works, the adjustment period will be significant. That seeing for the first time as an adult it's not like flipping a switch. The brain needs time to learn what the eyes are doing. She turned her face towards Emily. He said some patients find it overwhelming, that some people wish in the early days that they could go back to not seeing. Emily nodded. That's true, it's documented. He told me that because he thought I should know the hard version, Ava said, not just the good version. She paused. I appreciated that. So do you want to do it? Emily asked. The question sat between them simply without architecture or pressure. Ava was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that Emily would carry with her for a long time afterward, the exact words of it, the way they sounded in Ava's particular voice. I've spent my whole life knowing exactly what I have, Ava said. I've never known what I've missed, and there's something almost safe about that. Missing what you've never had. She paused. But I keep thinking about my father's face. I don't know what his face looks like. I know his voice, his footsteps, the way he smells like coffee at 7 a.m. I know his hands because he held mine when I was small and I memorized them. But his face, her voice stayed steady. I want to see his face, Emily. Before one of us is gone, I want to see his face. Emily didn't trust her own voice for a moment. She waited until she did. Then we do the surgery, she said. We do the surgery, Ava said. Surgery was scheduled for Tuesday. The weekend that followed had a particular quality to it, the held breath stillness of a moment between the decision and the consequence, when there is nothing left to do but wait, and the waiting is its own kind of work. Emily worked her regular shifts. She took Ava's vitals. They talked more than they had before, and about different things. Ava asked her about her childhood, about why she'd become a nurse, about whether Emily was afraid of anything. Right now, Emily said, in general. Being wrong, Emily said without having to think about it. I'm most afraid of being wrong about the important things. Ava considered that. You weren't wrong about me. Not this time. You would have been okay even if you had been, Ava said. That's what I think. Not because being wrong doesn't matter, but because you actually looked. She paused. Most people are afraid to look closely enough to find out they were wrong. You weren't afraid of that. That's the difference. Emily sat with that for a moment. It was one of the truest things anyone had ever said to her, and it came from a 24-year-old woman who had never seen her face. Monday night, the general asked to speak with Emily in the family consultation room. He was there when she arrived, standing rather than sitting, which was simply the way he existed in spaces, as if sitting would require negotiating with the furniture, and he didn't have patience for that. I want to know, he said without introduction, how you are. Emily blinked. It was genuinely the last thing she had expected him to say. Sir, have I? You've been carrying this for 10 days, he said. You fought for my daughter when you didn't have to. When it cost you things professionally that I have some sense of, even if you haven't said so. He paused. I want to know how you are. Emily opened her mouth and then closed it. Nobody had asked her that, not once in the past 10 days. Not Patricia, not Che, not the residents who passed her in the corridor with newly complicated expressions. She had been the person doing the asking, the checking, the monitoring, the person absorbing everyone else's weight, and not one person had turned the question around. Her eyes went warm in a way she had not given them permission to. I'm good, she said. She stopped. Tried again. I'm terrified about tomorrow. And I'm really glad I said something, even though I didn't know when I said it how it would go. The general studied her. My daughter trusts you, he said. Ava doesn't trust easily. You should know that what she's extended to you is not ordinary. I know, Emily said. I feel it. He nodded once. Then he said, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the outcome, what you did the way you did it, that was the right thing. And I don't say that lightly. Coming from a man who measured his words the way others measured gold, it hit with the full weight of what it was. Thank you, General, she said. He gave her one more nod and walked out, and Emily sat in the consultation room for a moment, in the specific silence of a person who has just been seen by someone whose seeing matters. Then she went home. She set her alarm. She tried to sleep. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and thought about Ava lying in the dark and about all the difference in the world between a darkness that ends and a darkness you've been told will never end. And she thought about Tuesday morning, and about the moment somewhere on the other side of a surgery she could not control or predict or guarantee, when Ava Stone would either open her eyes and see the world for the first time, or open her eyes and find only what she had always found. Either way, they would face it. She had promised that, and she kept her from it. Tuesday arrived the way important days always do, ordinary on the outside, enormous underneath, indistinguishable from any other morning in all the ways that don't matter, and completely unlike any other morning in the only way that does. Emily was at Walter Ridge by 6 a.m. Ava was already awake. Of course she was. Emily walked into the room and Ava turned toward the sound of the door and said, "You came early." "I said I'd be here." "I know." A pause. "I just didn't know if—" She stopped. "I'm glad you're here." Emily crossed to the bed and stood close and took Ava's hand, the way Ava had taken hers, without asking, without ceremony, simply as a fact between them. "Whatever happens in there," Emily said, "you are not alone in it." Ava's hand tightened around hers. "I know," she said. The surgical team arrived at 7:15. The general was in the hallway, standing at attention in the way that was simply his body's default, but his face had something in it that Emily had never seen there before. Raw openness. The specific expression of a parent who has done every possible thing that could be done and has arrived finally at the border of what any human being can control and is standing at that border with everything they love on the other side. Emily stood beside him as they wheeled Ava toward the OR. Ava was calm. Her hands were folded on the blanket. Her face was forward. At the last moment before the doors opened, she turned her head in Emily's direction with that impossible precision. "Emily?" "Right here. I'll see you on the other side." A pause, then quietly, literally, and she went through the doors. The general exhaled once hard through his nose and then stood very still. Emily stood beside him. They waited. The surgery took 4 hours and 17 minutes. Emily knew the exact time because she had been counting every single minute of it, standing in the surgical waiting area with the general watching the clock on the wall with the focused attention of a person who has decided that if they look away, something will go wrong. She knew that was not how surgery worked. She knew the outcome had nothing to do with her vigilance or lack of it. She stood there and watched the clock anyway because it was the only thing her hands could do that wouldn't come apart. The general did not sit. Not once. He stood for 4 hours and 17 minutes like a man on post because that was how he handled things that were too large for ordinary human posture. He didn't pace. He didn't talk much. Once around the 2-hour mark, he got them both coffee from the machine down the hall, and when he handed her the cup, his hand was completely steady, and Emily thought, this man has held himself together through 3 wars and 18 years of this, and he is still holding. She didn't know whether that was strength or the most heartbreaking thing she had ever witnessed. She decided it was both. At the 2.5-hour mark, Patricia Okafor appeared in the waiting area. She didn't explain why she was there. She simply sat down in one of the chairs along the wall and picked up a magazine she didn't read, and her presence said everything it needed to say without using a single word. Emily looked at her. Patricia did not look up from the magazine, but the corner of her mouth moved in a way that translated unmistakably as, "I'm here. I've been here the whole time. Now stop looking at me and go back to waiting." Emily almost laughed. She pressed it back down. Dr. Che came by at the 3-hour mark. She had just come off a shift, but she hadn't left the building, which Emily also noted and filed away in the part of herself that kept score of who showed up and when. Che stood with them for 20 minutes, said very little, and then went to check on something she needed to check on and came back, and the quiet accumulation of all these people in this waiting room began to feel like something deliberate, like a gathering, like the kind of thing that happens around a moment that matters. At 4 hours and 11 minutes, Dr. Marsh's surgical resident came through the doors. Everyone in the room oriented toward her simultaneously the way plants orient toward light. "The surgery is complete," she said. Her voice was professional and measured and gave absolutely nothing away, which was the most excruciating form of sentence delivery Emily had encountered in her career. "Dr. Marsh will be out to speak with you shortly. Ava is stable and in recovery." "Stable," the general said immediately. "What does that—" "She's doing well," the resident said, and her expression softened slightly. "That's all I can say right now. Dr. Marsh will be right out." 6 more minutes, Emily counted those too. When Marsh came through the doors, he was still in his surgical cap, and his expression was the specific expression of a man who has done something technically difficult and knows it went right, and is carrying that knowledge carefully because the moment he puts it down, it will become something much larger than a surgical outcome. He looked at the general first. "It went very well," he said. Daniel Stone closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. The membranes were successfully removed from both eyes. Marsh continued, his voice steady and clinical in the way that steady and clinical is sometimes the most merciful thing available. The right side was more involved than the imaging indicated. There was additional fibrous material we hadn't anticipated, but we cleared it completely. The retinal architecture on both sides is intact and healthy." He paused. "The visual pathway is open. Both sides." "She'll see," the general said. Not a question. A statement he needed to hear leave his own mouth. "We expect functional vision," Marsh said carefully. "The adjustment period will be significant. The brain will need time to interpret visual input. It is never processed. It won't be immediate clarity. The first hours, possibly days, may feel disorienting. But the structural barriers are gone." He looked at the general directly. "She will see." The general nodded once. His throat moved. That was all. That single nod and that single swallow contained everything 18 years could contain in a person who had refused to break under any of it, and Emily looked away because some moments belong entirely to the person inside them. Marsh turned to Emily. He had been briefed on her role in the case. She knew that from Che, who had made sure of it. He looked at her the way surgeons look at things they find genuinely interesting. "Good catch, Nurse Harris," he said. It was not an effusive compliment. It was not a speech. It was the particular economy of a person who has spent decades in operating rooms where precision matters more than volume. But from Evan Marsh in that moment, those 3 words landed with the full weight of everything that had come before them. "Thank you," Emily said. "She's asking for you," he added. Emily looked at him. "For me?" "By name, specifically." He gestured toward the recovery ward doors. "Go ahead." She looked at Patricia, who had set down the magazine at some point, and was watching her with an expression that had gone past professional into something entirely human. Patricia gave her a small nod. "Go." Emily went. The recovery ward was quiet and controlled the particular muffled stillness of a place where bodies are doing the slow work of coming back to themselves. She found Ava in the 3rd bay, propped slightly upright, both eyes bandaged with soft white dressings. She looked smaller than she did in her room somehow, more exposed. Like a person who has undergone something significant and hasn't yet reassembled all the layers they usually walk around in. But she was awake, and she turned toward Emily's footsteps with that same precise orientation even now, even bandaged, even coming out of anesthesia. "You walk loud when you're trying to walk quiet," Ava said. Her voice was slightly rough from the anesthesia, but it was hers, completely hers. Emily sat down beside her. "How do you feel?" "Strange." A pause. "Heavy, like everything is very real and very close." She shifted slightly. "The anesthesia is making me honest, I think. More than usual." "More than usual," Emily repeated. "That's saying something." "Don't push it," Ava said, and there was something almost like humor in it, the dry, precise kind that was simply who she was, and Emily felt the specific relief of hearing it intact and unchanged on the other side of 4 hours and 17 minutes. "Marsh says it went well," Emily said. "I know. He told me before you got here." She paused. "He said the right eye had extra material, more than expected. He got it all." "He got it all," Ava repeated, like she was learning the shape of the sentence. "When they take the bandages off, when is that?" "Tomorrow morning. They want to give the tissue time to settle." Ava was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm afraid of tomorrow more than I was afraid of the surgery." "I know. The surgery was someone else doing something to me. I didn't have to decide anything. I just had to survive it." She turned her face toward Emily's voice. "Tomorrow I have to open my eyes. And that's mine. I have to do that part." A pause. "What if the first thing I see is ugly?" Emily blinked. "What? I don't know what anything looks like. What if it's all wrong? What if the world looks wrong to me?" Her voice stayed controlled, but under it was something genuinely frightened, the specific fear of a person standing at the edge of an experience no framework has prepared them for. I've built everything in my head, sounds and textures, and my father's voice is strong and warm and deep, and I have always imagined that a face with that voice would be, what if it's not what I imagined? Emily sat very still for a moment. Then she said, Ava, what is the most beautiful sound you've ever heard? Ava paused, caught off guard. What? Tell me, the most beautiful sound. A long pause. Rain, she said finally. Heavy rain on a window at night. When everything else is quiet and the rain it's layered. It's never the same twice. Does rain look the way it sounds? Ava was quiet. Probably not, Emily said. It probably looks like nothing you've imagined, but you love the sound of it. And when you see it for the first time, you'll love what it looks like too. Not because it matches what you expected, but because it'll be real and new and yours. She paused. Your father's face won't look the way you've imagined it. It'll look better, because it'll be true. Ava was quiet for a long moment. Stay tomorrow, she said, when they take the bandages off. I want you in the room. I'll be there, Emily said. Promise. I promise. Ava's hand found hers on the bedside rail. The same precise, deliberate reach. The same certainty. Okay, she said. They sat together in the recovery bay until the nurses came to move Ava to her room, and Emily stayed a little longer than she technically needed to, and nobody said anything about it because sometimes a room full of medical professionals collectively decides to simply not notice a thing, and this was one of those times. The next morning was the longest morning of Emily's life. She arrived at 6 a.m. She did her regular rounds. She checked her regular patients. She performed every normal function of her regular job with the focused mechanical efficiency of someone whose entire nervous system is pointing at a single point in the near future and refusing to look anywhere else. At 8:15, Dr. Marsh arrived. Dr. Che was with him. Dr. Holt arrived 4 minutes later, which Emily had not expected. She had half assumed he would find a reason to be elsewhere, to let this moment belong to the people who had fought for it. But he came. He stood in the doorway of Ava's room with his hands clasped in front of him, and he did not say anything, and his presence said the thing that nothing else had quite said yet. I was wrong and I am here, and I will not look away from it. The general was already in the room. He had been there since 7 a.m. He was sitting in the chair beside Ava's bed, actually sitting for the first time Emily had seen, with his elbows on his knees and his head slightly forward like a man in prayer, or something that requires the same posture as prayer. Emily stood on the other side of the bed. Ava reached up and found her hand immediately. You're here, Ava said. I'm here. Marsh stepped forward. His voice was even professional, warm in the measured way of a man who has learned that warmth and precision are not opposites. Good morning, Ava. I'm going to remove the dressings now. It'll take about a minute. There may be significant light sensitivity initially that's expected. You don't have to try to focus right away. Let your eyes do what they need to do. Okay, Ava said. Are you ready? A pause. No, Ava said. Do it anyway. Marsh began to remove the dressings. The room held its breath. Emily felt Ava's grip on her hand tighten, not in pain, but in the specific, involuntary way that a person holds on when the ground is about to change under them, and the only solid thing available is another person's hand. The last layer came away. Ava's eyes were closed. The room was completely, entirely, profoundly silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The general's shoulders had gone rigid in the particular way of a man who is holding himself at the last possible edge of composure with the last available unit of self-control. Marsh said gently, whenever you're ready. Ava's face was turned slightly upward. Her jaw was set. Her breathing was slow and deliberate, the breathing of someone who has made a decision and is now walking through the door of it one step at a time. She opened her eyes. At first, nothing registered in her expression. Her eyes were open, adjusting, blinking against the light, the pupils contracting with a response that was now finally able to complete its circuit all the way through to a visual system that worked. Just that reflex alone, that normal, ordinary, involuntary reflex that every sighted person in the room had performed 10,000 times and never thought about, made Dr. Che press her fingers to her mouth. Then Ava's brow furrowed, processing, working. Her eyes moved slowly, searching the way a person moves through a new space, and she blinked again, and her lips parted. She stopped. Her voice was barely a sound. There's something. What do you see? Marsh asked quietly. Light, she whispered. It's everywhere. It's so much. She blinked again rapidly, and the muscles around her eyes were working in ways she had never had to use them before. Shapes, they're not clear, That's normal, Marsh said. Let your brain work, don't push. Ava's eyes moved. They moved and they landed somewhere and they stopped. On the general, he was 2 feet away, sitting forward in his chair. His face, the face she had carried in her imagination for 24 years, built entirely from the sound of his voice and the memory of his hands and the particular way his grief felt in a room. His face was right there in front of her for the first time. She stared at him, and then everything broke. Not loudly. That was the thing about it. Emily had expected she didn't know what she'd expected. Something operatic, something that matched the scale of the moment. Instead, it was quiet. It was the quietest, enormous thing she had ever witnessed. Ava's face simply opened. Every controlled line of it, every carefully maintained composure she had built over 24 years of learning, to need less, to want carefully, to feel in measured doses, it opened all at once like something that had been held closed by a single latch, and the latch had simply given way. Her eyes filled. Dad, she said, one word, his title, the word she had said 10,000 times in the dark, but this time she was looking at him when she said it. Daniel Stone made a sound that was not a word. It came from somewhere below language, below military bearing, below 18 years of standing at attention in the face of the thing that had broken him most completely. He reached forward and took his daughter's face in both hands, the same hands she had memorized when she was small, and his entire frame, this 61-year-old man who had never bent in 3 combat tours, collapsed inward like a structure that had simply finally been relieved of the weight it had been built to carry. He wept, without embarrassment, without containment, without any of the armor that had kept him upright through every other version of this. I see you, Ava said. Her voice was wrecked and certain and more present than Emily had ever heard it. Dad, I can see you. Emily was crying. She knew she was crying because her vision had gone warm and unclear, and she made no move to fix it because some moments do not require you to be composed. Some moments require you to simply be human inside them. Dr. Che was crying. Patricia, who had appeared in the doorway at some point without anyone noticing, was pressing both hands flat against her face. Even Marco, the resident with no volume control, who had materialized in the hallway outside, had gone completely silent for the first time in recent memory. Dr. Holt stood in the doorway. He was not crying. He was the kind of man who wouldn't not hear, not where it could be seen. But his face had lost every layer of professional distance, and what was underneath was simply a human being watching something that he had nearly prevented reckoning with that fact in the specific private way that people reckon with the things they nearly did. He looked at Emily across the room. She looked back at him. He nodded. Once. Slowly. She nodded back. That was their conversation. It was enough. Ava spent the next hour learning to see. Not learning to see clearly, that would take weeks, months. The slow work of a brain rewiring its entire relationship to input it had never processed. But learning to track. Learning that the blur in the corner that moved was a person. Learning that the warm shape 2 feet away was her father's face, and that faces moved when they spoke, and that this was information she could now receive with her eyes instead of only her ears. She made Emily sit in front of her for 5 minutes while she looked. What are you, Emily started. I'm memorizing you, Ava said simply. I know your footsteps and your voice and the way your hands sound when you set down a tray. Now I want to know your face. Emily sat perfectly still and let herself be memorized. You're younger than you sound, Ava said finally. That's a good thing, I think. It is. She tilted her head. You look like someone who means what she says. Emily smiled. I'm working on it. Ava smiled back, and it was the same smile, dry, precise, held slightly close, but now Emily could see it, and the seeing of it was its own kind of gift. In the weeks that followed, Walter Ridge changed, not dramatically, not all at once. Institutions don't change the way people change in a single luminous moment of recognition. They changed the way rivers change stones slowly under sustained pressure in ways that only become visible over time. The stone case was reviewed formally. The documentation gap, the unresolved photosensitivity notation from 2008 with no follow-up was addressed in a new protocol for long-term diagnostic review. Dr. Holt presented the case at a departmental conference and said in front of 40 colleagues the words that Emily had waited to hear from him, not for her sake, but for every future patient whose anomaly might live in a chart note that nobody followed up. We saw what we expected. We stopped looking. We cannot do that. He did not mention Emily by name in that conference. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew. Patricia Okafor submitted a formal commendation for Emily's file. It cited clinical observation, patient advocacy, and what Patricia called, in the precise language of her 30 years of nursing, the courage to prioritize patient outcome over institutional comfort. It was 3 paragraphs long. It was the most important 3 paragraphs of Emily's early career, and she read it twice in the break room, and then folded it and put it in her jacket pocket and kept it there for the rest of the week, like a thing she needed to keep close. Dr. Chase stopped her in the hallway one morning and said simply, "I'm glad you were in that room first." Emily said, "I'm glad you were in the imaging suite." They looked at each other for a moment with the particular understanding of 2 people who had taken different angles of the same hill. Then they went back to work, because that is what people who are genuinely good at their jobs do. Ava's visual adjustment progressed faster than expected. Dr. Marsh called it remarkable. Emily called it Ava because remarkable was simply what Ava was, and the efficiency with which she adapted to an entirely new sensory world, cataloging, organizing, learning, was simply the same intelligence and precision she had always applied to everything, now pointed in a new direction with a characteristic absence of wasted motion. She called Emily on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the surgery. Her voice was clearer than ever, lighter, and carrying something that had been absent from it before, not happiness, exactly, though that was in there, but fullness. The quality of a life that has been given back a dimension it never thought it would have. "I saw a sunrise this morning," she said, "from my window." "How was it?" Emily asked. A pause, the kind of pause that contains something too large to say quickly. "I don't have a word for it yet," Ava said. "I'll find one. I'll call you when I do." Emily sat on her couch with the phone and the certainty, quiet and absolute, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because the story had ended well, though it had. Not because she had been proven right, though she had. But because she had looked, when it mattered, at something everyone else had stopped looking at. And a young woman had opened her eyes and seen the world and called it remarkable, called it wordless, called it hers. The world had not changed, but Ava's world had, and sometimes one person's world is enough. General Daniel Stone sent Emily a handwritten letter on military stationery. It was 7 sentences long. The last sentence read, "In 38 years of service, I have met a great number of people who were brave. You are one of them." He signed it with his full rank and name, which she understood from a man like him was not formality. It was the opposite of formality. It was the most personal signature he knew how to give. Emily framed it, not because she needed the validation she had learned through 10 days of near-total professional isolation that she could function without it. She framed it because it was true, and because true things deserve to be kept somewhere visible, somewhere you can look at them on the mornings when the practical world asks more of you than you're sure you have. She hung it on the wall beside her nursing license. 2 true things side by side. She went back to work. She knocked twice before entering every room. She kept looking. That was the whole of it. That was everything. A 26-year-old nurse with a slightly crooked badge and 3 months of experience in an absolute refusal to stop looking had walked into a room where everyone else had already left, and she had seen a blink, and she had followed it all the way to the truth. One person paying attention, really paying attention, all the way down past what was convenient, past what was safe, past what was expected, had changed an entire life. And that is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing.